Welcome back, all right? If you're just joining us, you're in time for our last leg of Weekend Express. And we just want to discuss something that is quite interesting. And this is because, well, men will continue to maintain their working ex-wives after Supreme Court declined to hear a suit on that matter. More so, because of that, we're asking you this morning, do you think that it's justified for men to continue paying spousal support after the divorce? Like I told you, we're getting quite a number of tweets from this topic. Collins, you say, no, that should not happen. When you divorce, everything between the two is also divorced. Okay, so this morning I have an advocate. He goes by the name Daniel at church, who is here to help us understand better the whole issue of divorce here in Kenya, spousal support after divorce and etc. Daniel, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for inviting me.
I mean, Daniel, let's begin with that whole issue for the Supreme Court. Do you agree with what the Supreme Court has done?
I think we need to understand the Supreme Court ruling in its context. Not every case is admitted for hearing at the Supreme Court. The issue with the spousal support after divorce is now very clear in reading from the Constitution to the laws that have been developed. Now, it is not true. It is not true that the law requires men to support their wives after divorce. The law requires a spouse to support the other spouse. So it depends on which spouse is needy. The law actually allows a man to apply to be supported by the wife if the wife is the one in a better position, if the wife is the one who was maintaining the husband during the marriage. So there is what we call in law equality of rights in marriage. When you get married, the law provides that you have equal rights upon marriage, during the marriage, and upon the dissolution of marriage. So the notion that the law requires men to support their wives after marriage or upon dissolution of the marriage is not very correct. The right position is that the law provides for either party can apply to be supported, what we call maintenance. But now the problem is that the society we live in is such that we are in a patriarchal society where, you know, men are expected from the traditional, the old age. Men are looked at as the ones who support the family. And because of that, upon dissolution of marriage, in almost 90% of the cases that I've come across, it's the wives who then apply for support. Men do not come out to apply for the support.
All right, so this story comes after the light of one Munro's troubles, which, like I told you earlier when we were taking a look at press review, you can find all the details on page 8. Allow me to just spell out for you a few of that. So Munro has been ordered by the High Court to pay Walker, the lady, £600. That's about 81,000 Kenyan shillings monthly for 18 months. But the Court of Appeal enhanced that the amount, which is £1,000, about 136,000 Kenyan shillings, after finding that he had hidden his earnings. Okay, so Daniel, let's help us understand the rights that one has after a divorce.
Yes. Now, upon dissolution of a marriage, again, the starting point is that both parties have equal rights. That is the starting point. So when a marriage is dissolved, we come to, the law requires that, for example, the matrimonial property, the property that was acquired during the subsistence of the marriage, is divided among the two.
Right.
Yes, the wife and the husband, for that matter. And Article 45 of the Constitution is clear that both parties have equal rights to this. So it becomes interesting when now it comes to the division of the property, because the first question that then is asked is, what constitutes matrimonial property?
What does constitute
the law says that matrimonial property is property that was acquired during the subsistence of the marriage. But now, there are instances where this property, for example, is acquired during the subsistence of the marriage by one spouse.
So anything that someone has acquired before marriage is still theirs?
It's theirs.
But within marriage?
Within marriage, it becomes matrimonial property. So that there's a presumption that both of you contributed to the acquisition of this property. It becomes interesting where, for example, you find one spouse for example, is in formal employment, is working. The other spouse is, for example, if a scenario of a housewife, the husband is working, the wife is back at home. And then you acquire property during marriage. So upon dissolution of that marriage, is the wife entitled to that property?
Is the wife entitled?
And the answer is yes. Because the law says that when you're looking at acquisition of property during marriage, then it's a question of contribution. And the contribution is not only financial. The law says it's financial and non-financial contribution. So the court must assess to what extent. For example, the argument that is normally put is that while you are working, you are out there working, I provided you with emotional support. I
and
maintained,
also taking care of the house.
Yes, I took care of the house. I maintained our children. You know, I was running a family business and all these kind of arguments. So legally, all these are looked at as contribution. So then the law looks at to what extent did you contribute to that acquisition of the property. And also look at it from the other way. There could also be a scenario where in a marriage, the other spouse actually, instead of supporting you, is actually the opposite. So that you argue that were it not for my spouse, I would have acquired much more. He was not, or she was not emotionally supportive. She was dragging me down. She was wasteful. You know, this kind of argument. So the court looks at all that, so that if the court comes to a conclusion that the spouse was not supportive in terms of acquisition of the matrimonial property, then the court can hold that you're not entitled to a share. Okay. So it's not automatic.
Now, what happens that after a divorce, yes, the husband or ex-husband continues maintaining his ex-wife, the kind of living standard that she's used to. What happens if that living standard goes down? Because maybe one or two things that might have gone wrong in business for the ex-husband, or he lost a job. So what if that lifestyle goes down?
Well, when it comes to maintenance, what the law tries to avoid is that because during marriage, you are used to a certain standard of living. You are maintained up to a certain standard. And the law actually provides for it both ways. It's not only the man to maintain the wife.
Yes. So what is
it's for the wife. There are instances also where the wife would maintain the husband. And so it's the wife who actually brings this standard of living that high. So the law looks at it that upon divorce, when you divorce, when the marriage is dissolved, then it should not compromise so much that level of the standard of living. And so that only holds for as long as the spouse maintaining is able to maintain.
So what if the spouse maintaining is not able to maintain?
So if you are not able to maintain, there is an avenue in law where you go back to court and say, look, my financial position has changed. I've lost my job, my business has gone down. Or the other way around, that the person I'm maintaining is now capable of maintaining herself or himself. She's got a job, she's got a business. I mean, her standard has changed. So I do not need to continue maintaining her.
There's something you said, Danielle, that caught my attention. That you say that maintaining is both ways.
Yes.
So how does, in a divorce, all right? So how does the ex-wife maintain the ex-husband?
If there are situations, you know, there are cases where it's the husband petitioning for a divorce. On the grounds, the law provides so many grounds for divorce. You must prove one of them. So there are instances where it's the husband complaining that this is the problem. You know, my wife is better off financially than myself, and this marriage cannot continue. So upon dissolution of such a marriage where the wife has better, you know, stronger financial muscle than the husband, then the law allows the husband to apply and say, look, upon dissolution of marriage, I would want my wife to support me to this extent.
Before we continue with that aspect of finances itself, would you advise for a financial counselor during a divorce? Because a lot of the wrangles that even happen after marriage, it's still a lot of fighting of property. Because especially if these two have children. Because at the end of the day, they're still a family, despite the two people are not together. So would you advise in regards for a financial counselor that even post the divorce, things are still working out?
Actually, I would advise that very much so. Because if you look at the problem we have in Kenya is that if you look at our marriage regime, the regime for divorce, the laws that provide for divorce in Kenya, we are still a very conservative society. So much so that the law looks at it as though marriages should be maintained. You know, people should stay in there. So by the time you are getting a divorce from court, you've gone through so much emotional turmoil that at the end of it, you don't want to look at each other on the eye. So that kind of, counseling comes in very handy during, because, especially when children and property is involved, it becomes very tricky.
Yes.
Because the children will still remain the children of the two of you, whether you are married or you're divorced. And so, it becomes very important that some level ground must be reached where the children are still, taken care of. We call it the best interest of the child in law. The best interest of the children must be protected still.
Okay, so one of the questions that I'm seeing as well online is that what if a woman earns more than the husband?
Yes.
So we, in this case, the ex-wife earns more than the husband.
Yes.
So does that still means that the husband has to still maintain her, even when financially speaking, the wife earns more?
The answer is no in law, because maintenance only comes in if the party applying for maintenance is able to demonstrate to court that as a result of the divorce, I will not be able to maintain the standards of living that I was used to during the marriage.
Right.
Yes. The only problem, as I've said, is that men do not come out to claim this right, but it's there in the law. Yes.
Is there spousal support after divorce that is supposed to be there, and what kind?
There is spousal support that is supposed to be there after divorce. The one that is commonly applied is the financial support.
Okay.
Yeah, but the law gives leeway. The court can provide for different, very many levels of support. But the more commonly applied one is the financial support. And even that financial support, by the way, it's not always lifetime. The court would apply, say, for example, that you pay to your spouse so much money for this period of time, or that parties are allowed to come back to court and review this, say, if circumstances have changed, as I've said. So it's not a lifetime thing.
Daniel, is there a way that one can protect their wealth in marriage?
Yes, the law allows, at the time you are getting into a marriage, the law allows the two of you to enter into an agreement. We now have that provided for in our laws.
Okay.
You can enter into an agreement and say that, for example, the property that I acquired before I married you is my property. The property you acquired is yours. The properties we acquired during marriage, this is how we are going to deal with it. This is how we are going to divide it. And when that is put down in writing, then it clarifies the rights of parties in case of a divorce. But of course, what happens is that the reality is that at the time you are getting married, nobody wants to talk about a possibility of divorce. Yeah.
Yes.
So some of these things only come in at the tail end, when now the reality hits us that, we can't live together.
Okay, so let me understand this. Yes, one can still protect. Of course, anything that you acquire outside of marriage is yours.
Yes.
And once inside marriage, you can still agree that...
Yes, you can still agree inside marriage that when we are married, if I acquire this property, for example, using my own finances without your contribution, then perhaps your interest in it would be something like 10%. I have 90%. Oh. Such kind of an arrangement is allowed.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. And let's talk about extended families, because one of the things, again, is that within divorces, extended families tend to come in a lot. Yes. So you'll find that maybe your ex-wife or your ex-husband, their families, because of the sort of asset and wealth that is there, sort of fight amongst themselves as well. Is there a way to keep extended family out of it, legally speaking?
Yes, there is. Actually, the law is that for purposes of when marriage is dissolved and you're considering the property for purposes of the marriage, If it's in, for example, property that belongs to the family, inherited property or property that you hold in trust for others, you know, like the property you say that you got as the one that you are bequeathed by your father, great-grandfather, parents, something like that.
Exactly.
Then that is excluded. What the law that applies there, actually, the law, it's provided that the traditional ways of looking at, you know, applying that inheritance should be considered.
So you would say then that means keep your inheritance
separately. The interesting scenario that comes in is where, for example, you acquired property before you got married. For example, if it's a piece of land, you acquired it before marriage, then you got married, and then developed the property during marriage. And then an argument, a question then comes in at the end of when now the marriage is being dissolved. Does it form part of the matrimonial property?
Beautiful. There's one question here by a viewer. Cindy says, how can I support my husband after divorce when the children are in my custody? Children are expensive and I'm taking care of them. Even if my job is good to take care of my ex-husband, it's still a no way. So I think even for Cindy, for her, it's the issue of how do I even support my husband when I still have our kids to support, especially if she's the one who has custody of the kids.
Now, for the kids, it's a totally different story. For the children, it's a totally different story. The Children Act is clear that the best interest of the children must be maintained. So even when you divorce, when you dissolve your union, the best interest of the children must be maintained by both parties.
Okay.
So it's not only the party who has custody of the children who takes care of the children. Even the other party, the other spouse who does not have the actual custody of the children is still legally obligated to take care of those children. And therefore, it's a shared responsibility.
Can you sue someone for not taking care of their children?
Yes, you can sue someone for not taking care of their children.
So Kenyan law allows people to sue for not taking care of the children?
Yes, actually, we have special courts for that.
I like
the
that.
Children
Special courts.
Yes, yeah, that only deals with the issue of children. It's there, the Children's Court, that only deals with the issues of children.
So there's a term I've been trying to remember, and hopefully you help me jog my memory.
Yes.
And it's important because I feel like it's also important for our viewers to get to know about it. And we see this with a lot of celebrities, a lot of wealthy people. There's a specific statement, or should I say paper, that they sign in order to make sure that their assets or their wealth, their spouse does not get part of it. It's something that is very common in the Western world. Yes,
you know, that's why I was saying our system is a bit conservative.
Yes.
In like the Scandinavian countries, it's very different. Because there, the divorce is granted on demand. If I say I want divorce today, the courts cannot refuse me divorce. And their system also is such that you can decide. You decide what property is available to my spouse, what property is not available to my spouse. The system is quite different from ours. Ours is still very conservative because we still draw from that notion that, you know, somebody is supposed to support the other. Without me, you cannot. Without you, I cannot. So it's quite different. It's not there in our system.
Two things.
Yes.
Then do you think that our systems need to change? Are their systems better, that we need to sort of replicate theirs?
I do not think so. I think, you know, the law follows the society.
Right.
So our system just reflects the level of society that we live in. I think we are still at that level where we still value our traditions so much. So with the kind of life we live, the traditional values. In fact, even our constitution itself recognizes the values of the traditions, the customary laws, and all these kind of things. So,
guess what, Daniel? I just remembered the term, prenups.
Yeah,
here in Kenya, are prenups allowed?
They are not.
Prenups are not allowed in Kenya?
No, they're not allowed in Kenya. We've not yet gotten to that level yet.
Why?
As I've said, we are a conservative society. Extremely conservative. Okay.
Yes. Now, let me shift gears a little bit.
Yes.
Polygamy. Because, like you said, we're an African society. There are polygamous marriages. So in regards to, let's say, husband one, the first husband decides to divorce wife number 3, and the whole property of sharing happens, does that affect wife 1 and 2?
Interesting. It does.
I know, right?
It does affect wife 1 and 2. And the law actually takes care of that.
Legally?
Yes, there's provision for that. The Matrimonial Property Act provides that. You see, the law recognizes, in Kenya, there are 5 types of marriages that are recognized by the law.
Yes.
There's what we call the Christian marriage, which is the normal weddings that we attend every day. We have the civil marriages, which are done, they are commonly known as the AGs, done at the Attorney General or the DCs, or wherever it is. Then we have the African traditional marriages,
right,
which are also recognized by the law. Then, of course, we have the Hindu marriages and the Islamic marriages.
Right.
So those are the 5 types. Now, of those 5 types, the African traditional marriages and the Islamic marriages are potentially polygamous. So the law says that if you are in a polygamous union and there is a dissolution of the marriage, if a property is acquired before you marry your second wife, then upon dissolution of the marriage, the law presumes that that property is only between you and the first wife.
Oh, wow.
So that the second wife, if now the dissolution of the marriage is with the second wife, then that property is not available for that kind of arrangement.
Let me understand that. If the property is not with the second wife, it doesn't affect wife number 1?
No. If the property is acquired, say you get into a traditional marriage that is potentially polygamous, then when you are still the 2 of you, you acquire property. Then you go to wife number 2. Then you acquire other properties also when wife number 2 is there. If you are divorcing wife number 2, the property which you acquired with wife number 1 before wife number 2 came into picture is not available for wife number 2.
So it's not touched?
It's not touched. But the property you acquired with wife number 2, because wife number 1 was already there, it applies to wife number 1. So essentially wife number 1 is entitled to everything else that is acquired. And it follows like that.
Wow. Thank you so much, Daniel.
Yes.
Any closing remarks for Kenyans?
In my closing remarks, I think I would say we've come a long way in terms of the law dealing with support, divorce, and all these kind of things. There was a time when most of these things, we relied on an old English law that was long time abandoned. But our legislature has done well. We've come a long way. The rights are now properly spelled. I think the problem that comes in is in terms of we need to educate Kenyans more on their rights during divorce. And also we need to involve a lot of counseling during the divorce proceedings, because again, people need to contain emotions, because most of the decisions we make during divorce proceedings are emotional. And there are so many parties involved, particularly more so where children are involved. So people need to be counseled, and people need to be talked to how to contain their emotions as you go through the legal process of divorce.
Lastly, as an advocate, are there loopholes that you feel that are in the system that something could be done?
Of course, there are a number of loopholes that are there, like just the question we were talking of maintenance. It's still not very clear the kind of maintenance or under what circumstances. The law does not spell out under what circumstances. It just says the standard of living, and you see that can be very amorphous. I mean, it's something that can be interpreted in a million different ways. So there are still areas that need to be worked on, that need to be fixed, so that parties feel safe in all this arrangement.
Okay. Thank you so much, Daniel. Daniel, a judge who is an advocate helping us understand divorce laws here in Kenya, especially after that specific Supreme Court announcement. Details on that are on the Standard this morning, so you need to grab a copy of your Standard. We're taking our commercial break here on Weekend Express. We'll be right back with a bit of entertainment. You get to meet an amazing dance crew, and I cannot wait to see a bit of their moves, so you cannot go anywhere. We'll be right back.